Welcome back to another episode of Tech Unhinged, where tech gets human. I'm your host, Rabia Javid, and today we are joined by someone who has spent over 15 years helping consulting firms stop being invisible and start winning better work. Florian Heinrichs is the founder of Client Friendly and a partner at the Visible Authority, both focused on helping mid-sized consulting firms. He works with firms ranging from 3 to 10 million in revenue. Before that, he held senior in-house roles at Deloitte and Accenture, where he helped build and scale a multi-billion dollar business unit, driving towards 25% year-on-year growth targets. He also brings deep experience from senior roles at global communications agencies, BCW Global and Levi's Communications, advising professional services and technology firms across international markets. Welcome to the show, Florian.
Thanks you for having me.
Well, we're so glad to have you with us today. We'll start off with some icebreakers before we dive into the topic, which is how AI is reshaping tech consultancies in 2026. So, Florian, given the enormous scope of your consulting experience and leadership services, if you had to describe consulting today in one word, would it still be expertise or is it becoming automation?
It's expertise and it will remain expertise forever. And my pointed response there was, if software in itself would solve any problems, consulting would have been dead decades ago. But it turns out that it continues to be true. You need both the expertise and the people side of things and the computers and the software to really get to a solution. And I think that's what the game continues to be, right?
Well, I think your this answer kind of nullifies my next question, because it was that if
I'm sorry for that.
If there was one thing you would say that still feels uniquely human in the world of automation in consulting, what would it be?
Well, I think there's lots of talk about creativity and judgment, and I think all of those remain true. I would add to that, to those notions, that if on a certain philosophical level, I mean, what is business, or what is a business? Is people working with people, and then machines come into this at a varying degree. Tools or machines have been for thousands of years. So it's a mix of the two. But the moment people side of the equation disappears, I think, I might be wrong, but I think there's no business anymore. So that stuff will remain relevant. I have said elsewhere that I also think the people-centric aspects of consulting might actually become ever more important. If you think about what AI does to a certain extent, or maybe to be more careful, claims to do, because there's a difference between what the tools claim to be able to do and then what they are actually able to do today. What they claim to do is take out a lot of the toil work in consulting, right? Crunching the numbers, building the model, running the simulation, writing the plan, like drafting like a deliverable or whatever. And that's fine, but that doesn't take away the need for human judgment, for communicating about the deliverables, for working with people, addressing concerns, all these types of things. Like, let's call that the change aspect or the implementation aspect. In fact, what I believe is what it does, it heightens the need for those. Because now that the computer can do many of the preparatory tasks, there will be more of that done in shorter time, which means the demand for people who work on the finalizing the decision and then making the change happen side of things will probably go up. I think I might mispronounce the name. I think it's called the Jevons paradox. That describes just that. If processes get more efficient, that efficiency usually gets reinvested not in savings, but in increased consumption of the now more efficient process. So with AI coming in, I would expect the need for consulting to go up. Does that make sense? I'm not saying the jobs stay the same. I'm not saying the jobs will stay the same. I'm not saying the costs will stay the same. There's massive change happening already in the market for sure. But my prediction is that now that some of the labor intensity and maybe some of the costs come down, usually the demand goes up.
So now when we talk about the breaking point here and how AI is actually, disrupting, we see that there is this growing narrative, including from Forbes Tech Council, that AI is fundamentally breaking the traditional consulting model, as you hinted upon, in your previous answer. So what exactly is breaking and why now?
I wish I knew that. I'm working hard to figure that out every day. It's a complicated story. And I like that you use the word the narrative is there, because the first thing you can see immediately is there's hype around AI solutions in the market. And that hype has an immediate impact. Tech-minded critical people sometimes struggle to grasp because they might say, well, but the AI cannot do this or that. And they are right. But that's not the point. The point is that some business sponsor somewhere believes that maybe the technology can, right? And so their willingness to pay for the alternative, and that's the first impact, is eroding rather quickly. And you'll have read the headlines, right? I mean, I think one of the big four consultancies themselves demanded a discount for their own auditor, claiming that that auditor was now doing parts of the audit process with AI. So why isn't this cheaper? So the belief in AI enabling a utopian future of doing everything through the computer is already changing the buying behavior. That is impact number one. Impact number two then is that because of those expectations, there is now a huge expectation on consulting leaders to reinvent their workflows and their practices with AI. That expectation is there also, and it can go two ways. Either it works and the technology can take some of the work away. Well, now you have to restructure headcounts and teams and stuff because computer can do certain things that consultants used to do in the past. That is, however, the good case. What we hear a lot about behind closed doors is the opposite case, where the technology doesn't do good enough work to meet the expectations, which leaves consulting leader in a very tricky double bind position. We have many senior managers, directors, managing directors talk to us about this. The situation being there's a hiring freeze, or people have been let go even because, hey, you should be able to do this with AI, but the AI can't do it. So now you have more work that goes to more senior people while you're dealing with the technology that, for reasons that could be different, isn't exactly delivering against the job specification. And that is a severe problem on teams everywhere right now. You could hedge some of that with just accepting lower quality, right? But again, we've read in the press that that is probably not a feasible solution because, again, as in the case of a big four, you might be dragged in front of a court and being sued because the reports you delivered were full of mistakes an AI made, and you are being held accountable, rightfully so, for that. So what breaks? I think it's these three things. So there's changes to willingness to pay. There is what we have called the AI double squeeze. So this mismatch of expectation versus what you can really do with the tooling. And then there are areas where the technology is absolutely phenomenal in automating stuff, and you got to be smart about what that means for your how you do work. Put all this together, and what happens is the business model, the specific business model variant of consulting that is built on leverage of capacity. So I am one very experienced person that knows their stuff, and I service many clients and many packages of work because I have more junior people underneath me. I leverage their capacity. That type of consulting is under pressure because at least some parts of that capacity can come out of a machine today, and very cheaply because it's heavily subsidized, right? No one's paying the real cost for this AI stuff, which is another, like, what's breaking now. We talked about is what might break in the future. Well, the economics are not exactly behind those large language models. So if they change their prices, all my answers will probably have to change again. But for now, it's alluringly cheap to automate the bits and pieces of your work that can be automated with certain degrees of reliability. So that's happening as well.
We see that how the Financial Times reports firms are already restructuring around AI, not just on the outside, but internally as well. And we are also seeing a genuine operational change, within certain firms. So,
yeah.
When we have a deeper look at it, do you think that most of it is still just, rebranding and marketing, and there is like no ground reality to it?
This is what makes all these questions so difficult to answer, because there is some ground reality to it. Like if you have, I'm not a software engineer, but some code around the edges of business processes for funsies. If you work with Cloud Code, it seems amazing what it can do. There's certainly parts in just toil work in the office. We are recording this call right now, so writing summaries, like these types of things. There is genuine value there. That's one part. The other part is that enough, right? to make up for the insane cost of it. But it should be clear, right? If you talk about AI right now, I'm presuming we're predominantly talking about the generative stuff that comes to us in the forms of large language models and how they can be deployed in knowledge work. It's insanely expensive, incredibly so, to the point where, I don't know, if you read those numbers, $600 billion in CapEx investments. And is that ever going to create a return by helping people write email better, to be a bit provocative? That remains to be seen. And specifically with regards to software development, which that seems to be the discipline where it could have the gravest impact, because there's a constraint logic you can check against, right? It is code writing is a form of text generation, which is what those models are designed to do. So I can see that it can do some good here, but I'm also hearing lots of anecdotes to the opposite. It's just not clear. I'm not sure I can answer your question, but I would say, just on the principle of being careful as a business person, I would probably prefer to err on the side of presuming there is like a bottom line of value there, and there is going to be change, and I better understand this, which, by the way, is also the position a consulting firm should have, because this stuff is so complicated and there's a huge likelihood of wasting a bunch of money with stuff that goes away in 2 or 3 years. Like, that's just a scenario you cannot rule out if you're a sensible person. That is a huge demand for consulting, right? IT consultancies should be, if not in a position to give good answers today, they should be in the laboratory working on better answers to that question than mine on behalf of their clients. There's a huge need for that, I would say. Because to your point of companies restructuring around AI, I see that and I read the headlines, and honestly, it makes me doubt the hard value of some of those technologies, because if I read that certain companies are now tying promotions to AI logins, what that tells me is that the technology is not clearly valuable enough to be self-promotional. You have to force people to use this stuff, is what the headlines tell us.
100%.
That was not true for the invention of fire or the wheel or I don't know, cloud computing. Maybe at the very beginning, until people have reached a certain degree to familiarity, and then it gets going. But to be honest, ChatGPT is a couple of years old already. Generative AI large language models are older, expert enough to put a time frame on it. But some of the algorithmic stuff was around when I was studying linguistics at university, which, God forbid, is now getting closer to those 15 years. So it's been a while. It's been around for a while, right? Yeah. And if there was genuine superb value in it, then that's my challenge to the industry. Adoption should be way higher by now.
No, absolutely.
That's just my feeling.
You made some really interesting points there. But so, diving into the other part of this particular topic, as a partner and a visible authority, where your entire practice is built around helping consultants become recognized and trusted experts, what does authority actually mean in a world where AI can generate insights instantly?
Well, the word we prefer to say is expertise, because that's what you get hired for, and that is your expertise. To stand out as a consulting firm, you cannot offer up your expertise with zero additional constraints or parameters. You need to be clear where you apply your expertise to solve a specific problem. Honestly, that's everything we do in our business, is we help consultancies make that shift, going from what we call capability selling, where you go to market and say, hey, I have a certain expertise. Who here needs that expertise? Which is the pitch of a surprisingly large percentage of consulting firms to this day. And that is problematic because it puts the burden of figuring out how to best use your skills on the buyer, and buyers are not interested in that as much anymore. It also creates a business problem, because if you don't determine the constraints of how your expertise gets applied, that means you're open to everything, which means you open your business up to a huge degree of complexity. Every new client request could send you in a different direction and make you reinvent the wheel and spend more time over the proposal and touch up all those slides again. That is a complexity cost you do incur if you go to market just selling capabilities. That's not my criticism. It's a fine, you can do that. Lots of successful firms get built through capability selling. It's just there's a cost to it. That was my second point. The previous point was the patience and the appetite on the buying side to work with you through that is coming down, and that's changing. So what does authority mean in that word, or what does it mean, or what does expertise mean in the word, in the world of AI? We do think that is still the only chance you have, because if you sell capability, I know how to write up an operating model redesign. Well, ChatGPT can do that as well. Yeah. Because it is a form of raw capability within a machine. And we can have a long discussion of how good that is, how many errors it makes in comparison to your consultant. But the two models are very similar indeed. They are raw capability. As long as they are not clearly tied to solving a problem and further refined through the application of frameworks and experience and all that stuff, they are a commodity, right? Raw consulting, capability selling consulting is a commodity, sorry to say it, as is a large language model. I can pluck that out and replace it with a different vendor tomorrow. The moment you build authority by saying, hey, do you know what? I don't just have this capability. I'm deploying it to solve a specific problem. I give you something specific. You can have an SAP consultancy where people, or let's say Salesforce, common, I think, where people just say, hey, we are a Salesforce consultancy. We know Salesforce. We have 25 certified Salesforce experts. Who here needs some Salesforce? That's a commodity. I'm sorry to say it. The owners of those firms don't always say, what clients come to us because we are flexible and they stay with us because they like the team and so forth. And I say, that's all true, but it's true of every other of the 120 firms down the street. So AI, funnily enough, is the same problem, right? ChatGPT can do everything, which means it can do nothing, which means OpenAI doesn't have a product as such. They have the equivalent of electricity, but what do you do with it? So the trick is the flight forward, so to speak, for consulting firms, and the way how you survive in the day of AI is you tie your expertise to a specific problem and outcome. And this could be, just making up a joke, trying to get unstuck from Salesforce, right? We have invested in this significantly. It's gotten a bit clunky. We don't know where the roadmap is headed. We'd like to get off the platform and migrate to something else. How do we do that ideally? And the moment you say that's the problem we solve in the market, and you are the first firm to have certified Salesforce experts who help clients getting off Salesforce, I realize this may be a bit of a weird example, but that's the point still stands. The moment you contextualize your expertise in with a certain problem, everything changes because now people know what to call you for. It's obvious. If I have this problem, I need to call this number. You get more and more work that's very similar in nature. The better you are at this, the more the jobs look the same, which means now all the variance you incur is in the details of the work. So now you can pattern recognize and dive deeper and find interesting variants of the problem. And do this for 3 years. Now you're the best in your market, the region, the world of doing this specific thing. And in that scenario, ironically enough, not only are you better protected against AI, because that will not have that level of depth and its expertise, you are even in a position where you yourself can make better use of it. Because your expertise is now so deep and specific that if you prompt the engine, if you build a knowledge base of context documents, if you fine-tune the algorithm, it'll be incredibly much better and much more fit for purpose than someone who doesn't know what you know or just has superfluous knowledge from having done 2 projects in that space that uses ChatGPT and is then insanely vulnerable against hallucinations, superfluous answers, concepts that have been used elsewhere, right? It's funny to me, had people having ChatGPT write their marketing plans. Like by definition, that gives you something that's highly probable of being used somewhere else. Meaning there's no differentiation baked into this at all. So good luck trying this. This idea of building proprietary expertise and knowledge being the best defensive strategy you can play, and then that even becoming an offensive strategy because suddenly you sit on a treasure trove of insight that even the large language models don't have, I think is the strategy for this day and age.
Again, you made some really, really interesting points. Given that there is so much imbalance, within expertise at the moment across different levels, how do you then keep the balance with authority? So this road between expertise to authority, how do you keep that balance?
Well, I think to your point with subjectiveness and flexibility, I mean, to a certain point, you're right. It's always true, right? If something's painful or valuable, it's always subjective to a certain degree. But then I think as consultants, we are dealing with business problems that if I were to ever simplify them, all we do as consultants is always optimize within the profit equation. That's what it is. Like that's maybe an oversimplification, but that's the idea. And I think there are forms of problems, forms of value or outcomes people seek, and therefore then by definition forms of expertise that A, are almost objectively real and true, and B, if you're good about what you do, they might be persistent. Not forever, but sticking with my silly example of getting off of Salesforce, I mean, by definition, that's a market that the more successful you are, the sooner it comes to its end. But I don't think that you'll see the end of it in your 20-person firm over the next 3 or 5 years. So I do think that is pretty clear cut and pretty persistent in that sense. And I think if I understand your question correctly, how do I go from being an expert in that field to being an authority? Well, you talk about your learnings a lot and you educate people about why the problem you solve is relevant, meaning you need to contextualize what does it do to a business if it doesn't solve that. You could have perspectives on how this should be addressed and maybe not. You should be able to help people make the case for a change, right? This is the question of why should we address. I understand the problem. I see what it does to my business, but why would I change now? What's the argument I have to give to my boss? Like all these things, you should be clearly outspoken and public about that. I often say the stance and the process a consultancy needs to take, all it needs to do in terms of its marketing is the stance of academic publishing. Once you're clear on what the problem is you focus on, which is the same researchers do, you need to go in a lab and figure this thing out while at the same time constantly publishing about it. That's it. It's almost a mirroring of the scientific process. And I think if then your observation on the market, your entrepreneurial bet is true, that bet being that this problem is not only real, but it is experienced as painful and urgent for a large enough group of companies to make a market for you. If that is true, and you publish consistently in that space with hopefully ever more interesting insights, you almost can't help but becoming an authority in the place. I mean, sooner or later there will be competition. Usually there is already some. Otherwise, the market is not real. And then if you are successful, people will try and follow in your wake. But usually that room still will be big enough for you to still become an authority in your own right. Maybe not the biggest, maybe not the worldwide version, but in your regional market, in your sphere of influence, in your specific variant of a bigger problem, like you can still be the authority. And I think that is the job, is to push for that. Going back to earlier questions in the conversation, I think AI increases the pressure of doing that. That pressure was always there. You were always better off being a consulting firm with a clear proposition and expertise as opposed to capability selling. But it was very viable to build a company, grow 7% a year with capability selling. I think the increasing automation and softwareization of knowledge work, it's not just AI, right? Let's be honest. It's also SaaS solutions, like an ERP that also generates a dashboard and a cash flow projection. That was work that used to be consulting. I mean, go back further in time, people would employ 20 juniors to draw up a spreadsheet before spreadsheet software came along. Like you have software eating at those types of knowledge forever. So that pressure to push ever more into this expertise-led, don't just sell. My business partner Luke Smiles and we always say, don't just sell me the means. So don't sell me I know Salesforce. Sell me the end. I want to get off Salesforce. I want to rein in my spend in Salesforce. We want to scale up our Salesforce, whatever it is, right? But I'm interested in the end and not the means. And that pressure to those things exist on a scale and moving from the means towards the end and then the end after that and then the end after that. That is, I think, extremely intensified through the advent of AI and the hype around AI, both.
Also, Florian, on your LinkedIn, you make this point that all consultancies sound generic when they describe themselves, but become distinctive when they describe the issues that they solve, which I think most of the consultancies are trying to get into, or they try to get there. Now, if AI can generate polished propositions for any firms in 30 seconds, which most of the clients also do now before hopping into the calls, they are more prepared these days. So doesn't that mean the only consultancies that survive are the ones that have gone so deep into one specific client problem that no AI can replicate, what they know? Which I think, again, is very difficult in this space today.
So, yeah, again, nuanced answers to this. The first thing is, I think that what I meant when I said everybody sounds the same because they're all offering the capabilities. Like, what is a Salesforce consultancy to say other than we know Salesforce or versions thereof? Until they shift and they go issue and proposition first. Now they're already different from all the other capability sales, but step one. But this is, of course, just the beginning, and I think this is where you're right. Even if you were to say we solve this problem, there could be 20 other firms saying the same tomorrow. What I think my post you're referring to said was, once you start with the issue in mind, now you have the chance to get really different from others because you can ask all kinds of interesting questions. Sticking with my silly example of getting off of Salesforce, you can start to ask, when does that even make sense for me as a client? How would you, the consultancy, determine that it's a smart decision in my case? What are the best steps to take first? Among those best steps, how do you decide which one? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, starting from the issue, you can inquire your own way of working with firms, with clients, to find those bits and pieces of differentiation, and then you can stack them on top of each other. So we always talk about how differentiation is built brick by brick. Of all the problems in the Salesforce universe you could solve, you pick one or if you're a larger firm, a category of one, and then you have sub propositions, as we call them, so more specific problems underneath that. So you pick that. Okay, now you're already different from people who didn't make that choice. Then you say, here's our logic for determining whether that's a helpful step or not. You could argue with that, but now you're clear. You have made a choice, and that means you're different. So it's the stacking of choices that take you away from competition. And as long as the through line and the business rationale, the degree to which those choices make sense, are there and they're visible and they're real, and you can have clients that say, yeah, I buy that, you always have an argument to stand on. And I think that is how that works in principle. Now, to your point of, yeah, but AI could do that, I'm not discussing that maybe sometimes it could. I'm 100% positive it cannot do that today because it is a probabilistic token system, right? It comes up with highly probable answers, which are not where specificity and distinction and actually also expertise are found. Because very often, if you think about it, real expertise often comes down to knowing when not to apply the established best practice. Experience has to do a lot with exceptions to rules. That's a breaking point for AI already. So the second question then is, even if AI can do a lot of it, and there might be cases where it can, again, I'm not a software engineer. The way that technology works today, you'll still need a person in the mix to supervise the AI, to take legal liability, to fix something if that goes wrong. Do you want to do that? Do you want to have that person on staff all the time? Or would you rather hire an external agency that has those experts, continuously trains them and involves their knowledge as the tools changes, which that's the definition of a consulting firm? I think you'd rather go with a consultancy. So I'm not too concerned about the technology if you have a strong problem solution orientation. So if you are proposition-led consultancy, as we call this. And a lot of the questions we get around that stem from the history of consulting to bill by the hour, if I can shine a light on that, because software as a service never has that question. They just have the confidence to never discuss their pricing, right? We talk about all this stuff. Oh, if the computer does the work, if it goes away, whatnot. Well, if you make the mental shift of saying, I'm actually solving this problem and you pay me you pay me for having the problem solved, the hours don't factor into this. Whether my AI did it or not, doesn't factor into this. Whether your AI could do the same in theory doesn't factor into this. I mean, low-code tools are a thing. I could build my own website, no problem. Of course, we still have a service provider, because why would I waste my hours learning that? Why? The business case is not there. So the moment you step away from this billing by the hour logic and you look at, for example, software as a service, if I can call out Microsoft for a minute, they are charging me the same amount for PowerPoint and the maintenance of the PowerPoint service forever. They make a very meaty profit margin on it. They haven't improved the damn software for a decade. Like, I have the same issues with PowerPoint and I use it a lot. I've had 10 years ago. So there's no improvement in quality. And yet, not only do they charge me every month, the prices go up all the time. I'm not saying that's great business practice. In fact, I think the opposite is true. All I'm saying is consultants could maybe borrow a page from that book and come back to, and I said it before, I solved this problem. We have built all kinds of methodology and process to increase the actual chance of this problem being fully solved and you getting towards that outcome. I mean, we don't control the outcome in full as consultants, never, but we can maximize the chances of a client's success. What's that worth to you? And there's no, did an AI do it? Did the intern do it? That is not part of that discussion. It is the question of, do I as the client get the problem solved, and do I have high confidence in your ability of doing it? And I get that that's a fundamental shift of not just the mindset, but then also some internal structures within consulting. But those are manageable. That sounds arrogant, I know, but we have clients that did it, so I know it's possible. And I think that is the work so many firms have in front of them right now, right? Because of the changes that I'm not denying that there's a reset in the market because of AI. That is really true for many parts of the sector.
So Florian, in retrospect, if clients now rely on consultants less for answers and more for validation and decision confidence, do you think that it means that AI actually elevates the best consultants?
I think we see that happening already. There seems to be a benefit that goes to smaller, very, very narrowly positioned, expertise-led boutiques that have more senior people, because they have the expertise in spades. They always had it. They never could get into the, can you send 82 developers to 20 of my sites tomorrow business? That was always with the big four, with the highly leveraged leveraged firms, they are having more opportunities to compete now because they can say, no, I cannot send you 80 people, but I have one very senior business solution architect. He comes equipped with 20 agents and a sort of process we've built in software here. He can do the same amount of work. So what I said before, that capacity can reside in a computer, seems to put the big guys who built all the leverage in human brains under pressure, while it seems to benefit the smaller guys who always had the brains but not or who always had the expertise but not the leverage in sort of numbers of brains and pair of hands and whatever it is. So that seems to be real, and I do think AI can be an amplifier. And if going back to what I said earlier, if Jevons paradox is real, what we might see is the relevance and the cost and all that stuff in the value chain. Like, how many people do I need to generate a consulting outcome? That could come down, right? With that, prices come down to a certain extent, despite what I've said before, that you could price on what's the outcome worth to a client. But prices could down on average because maybe, just maybe, someone who says, oh, I also need this outcome, it's worth only $20,000 to me. I don't have more because I'm a small mom and pop shop and I would never have bought consultancy in a previous life. But it could now be worth the consultancy's time because they could say, yeah, we could send you a mid-level consultant and 2 agents and he could do that and we could make a nice profit on those 20 grand. It would have been cost prohibitive to work for you guys in the future, but now it's possible. Like, that is also an opportunity that opens up. And I don't know where that goes to. Does that go to the small players exclusively because they are closer to that small mid-sized market? Or do the big guys push for that? I don't know. It might level out. But between the unit economics changing, let's put it that way, right?
Yeah.
And then that impacting demand, it could level out in all kinds of interesting ways. But AI will definitely amplify, fast track, add capacity where that didn't exist. And honestly, maybe even, dare I say, improve quality. I don't trust any of the models further than I can throw them, as we have a weird idiom that works like that in German, which is a way of saying I don't trust them much. But there are ways in which they work well and improve quality of a consulting outcome, in that I can now do things I would not have done before because AI completely collapsed the timeline. This, to give one specific example how we are using it, we used to mock up a website for workshops as the proposition work comes together for clients, because it's a very tangible way for people to feel what the story and the service architecture might look like. And we used to mock them up in presentation software, which is a manual process, and that meant we would give people a new homepage so they can get the idea. Nowadays, we go into a no-code website generation tool and we build them an entire website. They can walk through this, they can criticize it, we can make changes on the thing, which gives them a much better feeling, not just how it would work, but it enabled us to have workshops about where could this break. Like, we have redesigned the proposition, you still have this old service over here, we're not sure where it fits. Like, that becomes way more. We could never have done that. Like, we could, if we had priced it before, clients would not have paid for it. If we had done it at our own cost, the margin would have evaporated. Now it really improves the quality of the product, because at a very low marginal cost, I can add that onto the service I'm already running. I expect to see a lot of that also.
Yeah, and so Florian, on the data privacy angle, AI-powered consultancies require clients to hand over sensitive data to firms using different tools, which they don't even fully understand at the moment. So is that creating a new trust barrier that probably no one is talking about?
Well, I can't speak for everybody's clients. We certainly sign, if you get into the Fortune 200, Fortune 100 size clients, they have an AI governance. They will make you sign waivers and stuff, and they will check on that. And if they catch you putting a question that sort of has traces of their name in ChatGPT, you know where that goes. So yes, that's absolutely, not only is this creating an issue of trust, corporate clients are already working on the solutions and they are thorough with that. So that is an additional cost, an additional burden that's coming to smaller consultancies in particular, because the job of mitigating those concerns and complying with those governance policies, that's on us. There are ways of working around this, and AI can play a role. Right? Game we play here is have a locally running model to sanitize inputs. And then if you need to consume a public cloud service through an API, it's the first step. Sanitize the inputs, then run it in the cloud, and then play that backwards. they can be technologically a bit more difficult to set up, which then again gives you an edge as the consulting firm because you have that setup and you could be the instance that the client goes through to have some of those questions answered with the help of a machine. They themselves might not be willing to take the same steps, while also being prevented from feeding their entire production data into or copies thereof into any because I mean, two consultancies have been in the press for being hacked with this stuff already, right? You cannot like this. You absolutely have to have good safety procedures there at all levels, and then you got to double check the outputs once they come back to you, right? It's really, and this is also why I have questions about the limits of those technologies, because there are these constraints and additional costs already, and they make sense from a commercial perspective now. It's still very attractive to use the models because the token costs are subsidized by venture capital funding. That's where we are today. What happens if that funding goes away tomorrow? Will you still embed Claude code at the core of your business processes? I'm wondering. I don't know, but I'm wondering. Which is why I have real questions about the seriousness of IT consultancies that just without any questions asked go in and say, "Hey, we are AI-led, AI first this, AI first that." This, to me, as a buyer, and I am at a very small scale, sometimes a buyer of these things, is a severe red flag. A consulting firm that comes in and says, "Hey, AI opens a few possibilities or opportunities in your field, which we have seen work great. And these are the constraints within which you could seize them. And here's how we make that." That's a much better pitch. Like, again, to your earlier questions, expertise and experience and the value of that it's all about nuance and differentiation. And these overgeneralizing flat statements, "Oh, AI this, AI that." No, we see where that ended. It ends with OpenCloud exposing all your API keys to the world. I advise any consultancy against those practices. I get the appeal. You can make lots of money right now because there's hype in the market and you can capture that demand. Can you build a sustainable practice on the back of that? I don't know, but I have a question. Anyone remember the metaverse consultants and the practices of the big houses and the trillions of dollars in metaverse revenues that very reputable consultancies predicted would exist? What happened to those guys? I can tell you that many of them are not working for those firms anymore because these practices got dissolved. So don't make the same mistake. Tell you that many of them are by buying too much of the hype. Take a constructively critical stance and advise people on how that technology makes sense for them. That's a much better ticket, I would say.
Yeah. And now if we dive into who survives and how, in this time and age, if the traditional billing model is under pressure, which I think it already is, what new models do you see emerging? Is it either subscription, outcome-based, or AI-enabled platforms?
So if you can build a platform, if you build this mixed model, which I don't know enough about, where Palantir seems to be sort of a bit of a trailblazer. So combining proprietary software technology with a service that's embedded at the client, I think that's when you can get subscription-like recurring revenue business models. I don't understand those very well because I'm not deep enough in the software world, but they are proven already. I mean, look at Palantir, right? So I think that is one direction you can go. For many smaller firms, the same is true if you're running managed services as an IT consultancy. That certainly makes sense. And I think you can, again, smaller players maybe can now enter plays that were cost prohibitive for them before. Like if I buy an outsourcing deal with a large provider, take a TCS in India or take an Accenture or those firms. If I buy a managed service from them, I'll often get a cost decrease guarantee in my contract. So over 3 years, they'll lower cost per ticket 5% every year. I'm making those numbers up, right? Because obviously they have a delivery capacity center somewhere in a lower labor cost geography. They have rigorous processes, automation, all that stuff to drive their own delivery costs down. Could I mimic that as an onshore only 30-person consultancy in mid-Europe in the past? Not necessarily. Maybe now with AI I can, right? Sorry, that's a challenge. But so maybe even in those proven models, some of the commercial details might change. Moving further down the chain, the big thing from my perspective right now, and we see that with a lot of our clients, is fixed price programs, which that's the first thing that opens up as you are a proposition-led consultancy that specializes in solving a problem. You still sell time and materials for a little bit until you have pattern recognition. You say, hey, every time, to get back to your example, every time a dentist comes in with this particular problem for a website, we do those 5 steps and we take on average 14 hours. So let's fix price this thing at 16 hours, our internal cost rate, and then see if we can drive efficiencies to improve the margin on that. That's I think, the best ticket. It's also very easy for clients to buy because they understand this is the structure. I get this. These are the deliverables. This is the fixed price. Very nice. And if you do enough projects that are very similar, which you should be doing if you are proposition led, you can statistically sort of reduce the risk of that over time pretty quickly, usually even. So that's a good way of going. Outcome based or value based pricing. I read a lot about that in the press. McKinsey does it and so forth. It's been around ever since I've been in consulting. And it's never been the default model, and I have doubts about it becoming so. Why? It's just structural reasons. Procurement doesn't like it because what's the outcome-based pricing on a website? How much of that do you as a consultancy control versus the client controls it? How are we going to measure that? What type of contractual agreement and data sharing needs to be in place for you, the consultancy, to be able to check my homework? The visitor numbers are mine. That's my data. You're not seeing it. So if I'm telling you, oh, there's been no increase in website visits, how are you going to invalidate that to drag me in front to enforce the outcome, right? So it creates all kinds of complications that the moment someone comes in and say, hey, how about we say $120 an hour, procurement is going to jump on those guys because they don't want to deal with the headaches. And that's just the legal or compliance side of it. There are technical challenges as well. Many consultancies drive improvements that a client is in no position to even do a baseline measurement on as the work begins, right? Many consultancies have to clean up the space to measure a baseline at the outset. So can the client even ever measure the outcome they're getting? Are they in that position? Yes or no? So there's all kinds of complications, and that's why I have doubts about it. That's also the reason why, if you look in those large consultancy does outcome-based deal, when I was still at Accenture, we did a couple of them. We usually did them in the form of joint ventures, right? These are not your run-of-the-mill typical consulting agreements. These are contracts that set up a new business. You own 50%, I own 50%. Both of us look into all the numbers. It's very clear cut in terms of profit splitting. And that is how you can run those things. And it can really be outcome or value based. But that doesn't lend itself to every type of consulting. So I read the other day, McKinsey now does 25% of outcome-based prices. They do. I believe the headline, but maybe the structure, the logic, and the frameworks they can apply might be cost prohibitive for smaller shops. So I don't know about the value and the outcome-based. What I do think might be there is a sort of a bit of a more, that is more similar to risk sharing, right? Where you do a mix of, hey, it's a fixed price engagement and there's a bit of a kicker if we see certain metrics, or there's a setup fee and then we collect this fixed sum if we see certain, that there are varieties of this where you take risk off the client side. I am personally, as a partner in a business, not always a fan of those, because if there is a power imbalance in the relationship, as in the consultancy is much smaller than the client, for example, and you have corporate politics applying on the buyer side, these risk models might create weird incentives, because if I'm not at the sponsor or highest buyer level, but I'm the department head, I might have an incentive to sabotage your work if your profit kicker comes out of my budget. Does that make sense? So there can be, I'm not saying clients are doing that. I'm not saying it happens a lot. I'm just saying, again, there are complications to those models that might make it so that you, at the end of the day, say, you know what, fixed price is much better to do and to deal with on both sides. So let's go with that. That's just my personal experience.
You've spent nearly 5 years inside Accenture, right? So, which is one of the most advanced tech consultancies in the world. From that experience, Florian, what do you think that big firms like Accenture are doing right that smaller consultancies are simply not doing, or vice versa?
Well, good question. So let me start by saying these are fundamentally different games. Take the fact that within my first couple of weeks at Accenture as in a global marketing role, I had to learn that marketing's job is not to win net new clients in the business I was in. That was not the job, because that part of the business wanted to work for the Fortune 500 and had, at the moment in time when I joined, 500 of those clients. So that's not a situation as a mid-sized consultancy. Like net new logo acquisition, not exactly a job. So there's big differences between those guys and the size they have. Also, in terms of the business they are in, they seem like they are broad and do everything for everybody, whereas in reality, and this is maybe something you can copy, they are specialized in a weird way. They are specialized in the leveraged capacity model, which is a type of consulting work your 30-person firm doesn't get to do. Yes, technically you might be doing the same work, and yes, you might even be smarter in Salesforce, or your expertise might be deeper, but if a client says, I have 162 sites. I need teams of 20 on half of them. Can you start next week? You are already out of the picture, and it's only the big four and a couple of technology. That is their market. That is their business. And you best presume that it's very different from yours, although there are very many similarities also, but sending that ahead. So that said, what the big guys are good at, obviously, is everything that has to do with standardizing, scaling, managing, running. So operational excellence is a huge one, not just in delivery, streamlining that, but also in the things that sometimes the boutique owners tend to find a bit more boring. Financial management of the ins and outs, all that stuff. Obviously, they're very, very sophisticated in those spaces, but that's kind of obvious. I think a less obvious one is the degree of sophistication in proposition-led selling that these firms do, and you could never tell because the marketing you see from the outside, the posters on the airports and the websites and stuff, that is generic capability-led. I'll say it. My business partner Luke would say the same. Fluff. You should not copy at all, but that is a function of their size. They are so big, it's very difficult to have any specificity at that higher level, but you better not believe that they don't have that specificity. They have very, very clear, very, very tailored proposals. We used to call them sellable units in Accenture, so packages of service offerings and people and so forth. And these things come with propositions and messaging and architecture and delivery logic that is very, very refined. You might not see it because you're not the buyer, but they exist. And I don't know, thinking back of examples, I was in Accenture's Industry X business. They sell digital transformation to industrials. They had very, very specific offerings for site turnaround for midstream refineries in the US. I'm not going to tell you what was in those packages, but we are talking at that level, and they were very clear about these are the 5 biggest problems for pipelines in that part of the ocean or whatever. Like it gets to that level of specificity, and I get that it's a bit of pointless advice because I'm telling you copy the stuff you can't see, but I think maybe take my word for it. That logic is there. They're very big on the capability selling in those closer to the revenue parts of their business, those parts of business development. And as a mid-sized consultancy, you should copy this and this exclusively, not the brand marketing they're doing. That is for later. You save that for when you have become successful and big and you have the margins. Do the other stuff, the stuff that's much closer to the talking to a specific client now, addressing those pain points, then building up from there until you get more and more abstract and general about these things. That's a function of their size. But the way you win in the market is you have a very specific proposition. You're very clear on who you put that in front of, and you build the internal piping to deliver that very smoothly. Those are the ingredients.
And what do you think, which firms are most at the risk at the moment? Is it the large incumbents, mid-sized consultancies, or niche players?
I think the middle will get the brunt of it because the large guys, they're on the press a lot. They are laying off people. They're clearly under pressure. They're also investing capital to ramp up AI capabilities. They're buying shops. So they have deep pockets and they can, I think, weather this. So the amount of LinkedIn posts predicting the downfall of the big four is insane. My reaction was, let's wait and see. Because, let's wait and see. Yeah. I'm not old enough to remember, but I've read in books about this. When the spreadsheet software came in, consultancies were facing the same issue because they have built up large personnel. Calculator used to be a human job, right? Of people who did spreadsheets, and the software took away that need. The client built that capability in-house for a bunch of dollars to be wired to Microsoft. So that went away. So it's a similar scenario. The big guys can probably weather the storm. They're already making motions, right, to deal with it. And the layoffs, as hurtful as they are for the impacted people, what they mean on the business level is the business is already responding, and they are in the luxury position of being able to let people go and still have a business. As a boutique owner, you can probably not lay off 20% of your people and still be okay, I guess, right? Other than if you're already in crisis, which I hope you're not. The small guys, like we said, they can maybe benefit from AI. They will have a challenge. We talked about the cost of those systems a bit. It comes down to investment. Consulting is a cash flow, has strong cash flows, but they are notoriously not too keen on investing significant capex. AI, I think, changes that. You can see people brag posting about their $120,000 a month Cloud Code bills now. I think that, so this notion of I need to put money aside to train my people in AI, maybe set up some hardware to have some local models running, pay extra for these for the tokens. Like that comes to all firms of all sizes, and that might be a bit of a challenge for the smaller guys as well. But then truth be told, most of them I encounter do have healthy margins, so they can probably stomach that. The guys in the middle are in trouble because that's a bit the nowhere land, right? Between you're bigger than the small guys, so you have started to win some of this capacity and leverage work, which is so highly susceptible to the computer doing it. But you're not big enough to build the supporting infrastructure. If you look again at the large firms, we talked about the problems that capability selling creates for the business. The big guys don't have these problems, not because they don't incur them all the time, they do, but because they have invested in infrastructure to resolve them. If I go to market capability selling, I put the client in control of the engagement. That typically takes the form of I respond to RFPs. So a lot of work nobody pays me for. Well, all the big guys have business development departments of people who do nothing but, like, they have solved this problem by building infrastructure to solve it. The middle guys don't have that. So they are hit from all angles. They need to make the investments. They are not big enough to have the infrastructure to sort of crank the handle and try to win more of the old school business, right? To sort of fill the pockets. And the core work they are already doing today is highly susceptible to the AI stuff. So for those guys, it will be most difficult. And I think they need to be moving fastest and with the most decisiveness towards a more, for them, it's almost like a pivot, probably in many cases, to a more proposition-led model. Yeah.
And also, Florian, if the junior analyst pipeline is shrinking because AI does most of that work, what does the next generation consultant actually look like to you? And who is responsible for building them, training them?
Oh, I love discussing that topic. So if you are firing all your juniors because AI does it, you are, if I can say it bluntly, stupid, frankly. And which I don't think anybody's really doing it. I think the way this gets reported in the press, oh, so-and-so fired all the people because AI. Nah, that is a blend of structural reasons of overhiring, softening demand in sectors and companies just responding. I think consultancies are still responsible for building their own pipeline. I would certainly do that if I were to still was in the business of doing that. We have no appetite for running teams anymore here in our business. But the nature of those junior jobs, I could see them changing. And honestly, we talked about where do the prices go. I think what technology always does, all types of automation, it de-skills the work to a certain extent, right? So steelworking in the medieval times meant you had to learn to be a blacksmith, which was like a 5-year training and then some. Once industrial revolution hits, you can work with steel by cranking a lever, right? Because you operate a machine. Historians don't come at me for this simplification, but the same thing could happen to knowledge work to a certain extent. So maybe what I mean by saying that is maybe you go from get an excellent degree from a great university to come and be our junior analyst for 2 years. That's the entry role. Get a good enough degree and have some experience working with LLM systems to be our AI supervisor trainee for 2 years. So the structure could change in terms of it becomes more an apprenticeship. I teach you how to work with the machine rather than an artisan apprenticeship, like I teach you the entire craft, right? And that could also mean that salaries come down, right? In terms of being a junior consultant for, I don't know, £60,000 a year in London. Maybe you are work with the chatbot assistant. I don't know what the job title is going to be. A quality assurance person for 40,000. I don't know. I don't know salary bands anymore, but yeah, I could see that happening. But then on a broader economic perspective, so bad for the people who join, but on a broader, because there's less salary, but on an economic perspective, maybe there's more open positions because of the speed with which Claude can chop out 90% stuff that needs some quality massaging. Yeah. I can do 3 times as much, right? So I need 3 times the people on that role. So that is my careful, as always, you always look like a fool if you make predictions. I might look like that in a few years, but instinctively, I think this is where I could see it going in the near term. And my call to action or call to attention for consulting owners is if you don't bring up your own next level of mid-level senior people, you're a mistake. By the way, not to drone on about the proposition-led, think too much. But the more you are proposition-led and then hopefully because of that differentiated and an authority market, the more specific the requirements of against the work your people do should be. That means you almost by definition should need your own training program and pipeline. Like you should not be able to hire a business graduate and set them off running after 6 months or well, maybe not 6 months, but it should take an intensive additional training in the ways of your firm before they can even think about becoming productive. Because again, this generalistic, undefined capability middle, that's the part that's under pressure. And yeah, universities will not train graduates in your specific methodology. So better don't fire everybody under 30 to replace them with a chatbot. I don't think that's happening in reality anyways. I think that's a press story, but yeah, don't make that mistake.
There have been a lot of news, around the layoffs from big companies.
When there's a headline, oh, we laid off 10,000 people, my guess would be that there are layers of types of work in a corporation that have always been more vulnerable and susceptible to disruption. So the senior solution architects and people of the knowledge are probably pretty safe. As someone with an arts degree writing technical documentation for the software probably always had a bit more precarious job in that overall setting. And I think of those 10,000 layers, it's probably a lot of those people. And even if we read, oh, so and so many software developers, what type of software developers were those? Were they really core to your product and very close to the center? Or were that people who maybe do some type of tech support and were always under pressure of being outsourced, provider switch, whatever. Those have always been sort of not the greatest jobs. And that should be the headline, by the way.
Yeah.
Why are those jobs not great? Could we fix that, please? Not, oh, the computer can now do software engineering. This is why we're letting everybody go. No, these people were always unfortunate and at the margins. And I think that's a structural issue. And this gets masked to a certain extent by now, oh, AI is the new game in town and so forth. By the way, a more positive version of this and a bit more provocative one, if I can add this here. I think sometimes what also happens is AI just shines a ruthless light on nonsense. Like corporations have gotten quite fatty during the Corona years for a bit, it seemed to me, and previously. So they've got a lot of fat in terms of paying for stuff where the value is not exactly clear. And now that AI comes in and promises that maybe there's a different way now of doing things. I'm not saying the AI can really do it. It just makes this promise. That promise, that hype existing alone is enough for people to turn around and look at the processes and question the value. And this is where it gets interesting because I think consulting isn't free from this. There's many things in consulting that never were that valuable to begin with. And now that someone says, oh, I've built an AI to do it, smarter people ask the question, yeah, should we be buying the AI? Or is the fact that someone in their garage over 2 weekends coded a slide builder that uses 3 LLMs, like literally patch this together. If it's that easy to replace, shouldn't we get rid of the process overall? Like the presentation writer is a bad example, but it's funny to me, we stopped using AI note takers in video conferencing calls. Because of the governance, we discussed this before. Many corporate clients will not allow you to do this, and I think they have good reason to not allow you. But the second thing is you can take a look into the analytics of these things, right? And you can get very astonishingly low numbers for who actually ever clicks and reads them, which tells you something about having those notes in the first place, which then shines a light on the junior who was in the call to take notes and build by the hour in our consulting past. So I think that effect is also real. The AI reset forces companies to reflect on, do we even need this in the first place? And there are cases, there are roles, there are jobs, there are types of work where the answer, unfortunately, is honestly, no. So, and then it doesn't get replaced by AI. It just gets cut completely. And that's that. And again, that's not what you read in the press, of course.
Yeah. So moving towards the last two questions of our conversation, Florian. So if you had to give one piece of advice to consulting leaders who are actively resisting AI adoption at the moment, what would you say to them?
Do they exist? So I think you might not be wrong. I want to acknowledge I can see reasons for why to resist this. You might not be wrong, but the times seem to be moving in a different direction. I recently made this comparison from AI to the car, to the automobile in the quote-unquote Western world post-World War II. A lot of people didn't like cars because they were rich people's toys. They caused a lot of crashes. Like Germany exports tons of cars. We used to have, at the turn of the century, protest movements against cars with posters you can see in museums today where they are called children, the killers of children. That's what cars used to be. So there were very many good reasons to say, as a means of transportation from a societal perspective, the car is not a very smart option, even in terms of economics. And still, that's where it went, because the powered interests and the money and the economic circumstance and having to build a bunch of infrastructure after lots of circumstantial pressures made it so. So your resistance against AI might be entirely correct and sound, and you might have all the right reasons. The times might still turn against you, so just be aware of that. America still runs on cars, not trains, even though there's many, many good factual reasons why they should have more trains. It's just not the reality. Yeah. So if you don't want to go the way of trains, maybe find a way dealing with AI, and a good way to not think about it at all. But sorry for touting my own horn here too much, but if you can shift your business to a more proposition-led stance, and often you already know the problems you solve, you're just not leading with them in terms of your go-to-market and messaging and way of thinking, you bury them in the case study. You say, we know Salesforce, who needs Salesforce, yada, yada, yada. Look at this problem we've solved here, this problem. So if you can just flip the order and start thinking about and talking about your clients' problems and how you solve them first, you are already improving the entire business of your consultancy. If you do that enough, you might eventually find yourself in a position where now clarity and stringency have increased, complexity has come down, business processes have hardened to an extent which way you could say, hey, maybe we could save an additional 6 hours if a computer could help here. And then that AI can come in and naturally support the problem-solving process that you are selling and where you take your pride in, and which is your way of actually helping people. And that is completely different than we are an AI-first consultancy helping you transform your business of AI, which is nothing. I run a business. I don't want anyone to transform it. That sounds like way too much work and risk. Nobody's buying this stuff. So ignore that noise in the market, focus on the problems you solve. And once you are robust and successful enough in bringing in the same problem ever again, deepening expertise, building an authority in your market for being good at solving that, then you can ask the question, could AI help me do this? That's one thing. The second question, the second answer, we touched upon this earlier. If you are in IT consulting, whether you like AI or not, it is making the lives of your clients more complicated because they get the same questions from their bosses. And it is your job as a consultant to help them navigate that. So AI as a complication, as noise in their day-to-day, help them solve that. It's just become part of your job description, much like any other IT disruption would be.
After years of working inside consulting firms through exactly this kind of, disruption and changes, what's the one lesson you had to learn the hard way?
The stickiness of the old ways, brutal. And everything I say seems, the Americans have a saying, it's easy from far, far from easy, because the conceptual logic of, hey, just talk about the problem first and structure your go-to-market message, that you can do that in an afternoon. To your earlier point, with ChatGPT, you can probably do it in 15 minutes. Getting your entire organization of 30 consultants who for their entire existence have been trained in doing the opposite are now working in probably a set of incentive structures geared towards the opposite and dealing with clients for their entire life have been trained in buying the opposite. Just because there was no better alternative is the hard part. So coming back to something earlier, you asked me, how does this translate to the people side of consulting? Getting the proposition work and the ideas and the structures is, you can get to a maybe decent enough version of that with an AI tool pretty quickly. That's not the hard part. Organizational change, the making it stick, the dealing with exceptions, getting some clarity in the messiness that still persists because everybody involved is a person. That is the hard part. And that never goes away, which is good news because that is also where the market for consulting has always been and will continue to be.
Well, Florian, thank you so much for your grounded and insightful conversation and sharing such great insights with our listeners today.
Thank you for hosting me. It's a lot of fun and continues to be for me to talk about this stuff and great questions. I really appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
To everyone listening, thanks for joining us on Tech Unhinged. Until next time.